For over 20 years, the Ontario Human Rights Commission has promoted the right to education for students with disabilities. The Commission has developed policies and cases and been involved in cases at the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario and the Supreme Court of Canada. Yet, we continue to hear from parents, students, and educators that the needs of students with disabilities are not being met in Ontario public schools. Ontario's Education Act recognizes that all students must be provided with the opportunity to realize their potential and develop into highly skilled, knowledgeable, caring citizens who contribute to society. As recently as Monday, the government affirmed the importance of inclusive and accessible public education. Indeed, public education is essential to our economy and our democracy. When students with disabilities are left behind, Ontario is less inclusive and less prosperous. That is why today, to mark Learning Disability Awareness Month and Dyslexia Awareness Month, the Commission is launching a public inquiry into human rights issues affecting students with reading disabilities in Ontario public schools. This province-wide inquiry will assess whether school boards are using scientific, evidence-based practices that allow students to obtain the reading skills they need to succeed in school, work, and life. Put simply, the inquiry will evaluate whether Ontario's public schools are realizing the right to read. In classrooms across Ontario, there are children who fail to learn to read. Many would be surprised to learn that Canada and Ontario rank below Russia, China, and the United States in reading. EQAO results show that more than a quarter of grade 3 students did not meet the provincial standard for reading. And there is a persistent discrepancy in achievement between students with special education needs and their peers. Over half of grade 3 students with disabilities did not meet the provincial standard. This is unacceptable. Learning to read is not a frill. It is not a privilege. It is a basic and essential skill, and learning to read is a human right. The United Nations recognizes that people's ability to read is essential to the cultural, political, social, and economic growth of a society. Yet there are students in classrooms across Ontario who cannot read. These students will struggle in all aspects of school, from language to math. They're more vulnerable to mental health disabilities, behavioral issues, bullying, and dropping out. And problems continue beyond school. People with low literacy are often underemployed and overrepresented in our homeless population and in our jails. They're more likely to attempt suicide. Many children who struggle with reading have a learning disability. Dyslexia, for example, affects about 10% of the population. Despite this prevalence, the Commission is concerned that students with reading disabilities are not getting the supports they need. The parent of an 8-year-old girl told us, without timely remediation, her daughter is entering grade 3, barely able to read. Last year, her daughter asked Santa Claus for a unique present, the power to read. The parent of a 14-year-old boy told us that her son was not assessed for a learning disability until grade 7, and as a result, he's reading at a grade 2 level. She said that watching her son struggle has made her sad. She said that she feels like she has failed as a parent. We heard from many more parents right across Ontario who are frustrated with the system and scared about their children's future. These concerns are all the more troubling because reading disabilities can be remediated with early screening, intervention, and support. Indeed, parents expect public schools to adopt science-based approaches that allow their children to learn to read. Parents expect that educators will use curriculum and teaching methods that are effective for the largest number of students. Parents expect that students will be screened as early as possible to identify potential issues. Parents expect that students will be supported with early interventions that are evidence-based. Parents expect that students will get timely and effective accommodations when they need them. And parents expect that students who need them will be provided with psychoeducational assessments in a timely manner. These are reasonable expectations, and they are essential to the right to read. The Commission's inquiry will assess whether boards are meeting these expectations. We will assess whether public schools are using scientific, evidence-based approaches to meet the needs of students with reading disabilities. The Commission's inquiry is provincial in scope. We will hear from parents, from students and educators from across Ontario. We will investigate practices across a representative sample of 8 school boards. These include boards from different parts of the province, urban and rural, boards that serve larger proportions of Indigenous, racialized, and newcomer students, boards with different socioeconomic demographics, boards with varying special education plans, and boards that are currently part of the government's pilot project using Empower, a reading intervention program. To be clear, we have included boards with EQAO results that fall both above and below the provincial standard for reading. The boards we have selected are representative of issues that are provincial in scope and impact. The school boards we will obtain information from are Hamilton Wentworth, Keewatin Patricia, Lakehead, London Catholic, Ottawa Carleton, Peel, Simcoe Muskoka Catholic, and Thames Valley. We will assess these boards against 5 benchmarks that are widely recognized as essential to an effective and systematic approach to teaching reading. This systematic approach is more cost-effective than the current wait-and-see approach focused on individual accommodation. These 5 benchmarks are, first, the use of universal design for learning. Second, mandatory early screening. Third, the use of effective reading intervention programs. Fourth, appropriate accommodation. And fifth, timely psychoeducational assessments. First, we will look at whether boards adopt curriculum and teaching methods that are effective for the largest number of students. This approach is often referred to as universal design for learning. In 2006, Ontario moved towards the whole language approach to reading, which focuses on predicting words based on their meaning and sentence structure. This approach is not backed by science. In contrast, the same year, 2006, England listened to experts and adopted a universal design approach involving structured literacy. This approach emphasizes phonics, or the relationship between sounds in speech and the written word. Today, England outperforms Ontario on nearly every measure of literacy. Our inquiry will explore whether Ontario should adopt this back-to-basics approach. In terms of early screening, we know that time is of the essence when it comes to reading disabilities. Our inquiry will look at whether boards are mandating the use of scientific evidence-based screening tools in kindergarten or grade 1 to identify students who may have reading disabilities. This is another measure that England implemented back in 2012. We'll also look at the availability and use of reading intervention programs like Empower, developed by Sick Kids Hospital. We will explore whether boards provide effective accommodation, because even with early intervention, students with reading disabilities may require and are entitled to receive accommodation. These accommodations may include using assistive technologies like screen readers, alternative formats for assignments, or extra time on tests. Finally, we will consider whether there is clear criteria for when psychoeducational assessments are offered and required, and how waiting lists are managed and maintained. Beyond looking at this representative sample of school boards, the Commission may request information or assistance from the Ministry of Education, the Ontario College of Teachers, and faculties of education. We'll hear from parents, students, and educators across the province and visit communities served by boards identified in our inquiry. The Commission has retained Dr. Linda Siegel, an internationally recognized expert in reading disabilities, to assist us with the inquiry. We will release an inquiry report with findings and recommendations in 2020. Of course, this timeline depends on when we receive information from school boards. Given yesterday's events and the present uncertainty, we will work with boards to understand their capacity and develop realistic timelines. Our ultimate goal is to make the right to read a reality for students with reading disabilities. Thank you.